Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, me too. This is To an X Podcast, episode 21, and I am your co-host, Sean.
And I'm Lisa. Does this mean our podcast is old enough to drink? Yeah, everybody has to say that when something is 21.
Good grief. Yeah, these are the kind of things that make me want to rethink my anti-violence stance.
Hey!
What? Oh, you're from Jersey, so it's in your blood.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We are not a calm, peaceful people.
I guess not. But anyway, speaking of calm and peaceful, we got a little tiny bit of feedback from Dan out in Louisville, pardon me.
Gee.
Yeah, gee, who could that
I wonder
possibly
who that
be?
is.
Possibly formerly of Astoria, perhaps. But when we were talking about Smile in the previous episode, one of us, probably this guy right here, mentioned Jack Riley lyrics being used in Surf's Up, and hence my thinking that using those lyrics in the version that they used in the lineup for 2011 to piece together that Smile album, as it were, on disc one of the Smile sessions. He questioned the assertion that it was Jack Riley because he could have sworn that it was something that Brian came up with, possibly even on the spot during the sessions in 71 or 70, whenever. When did they actually, I think it was 71 when they finished up Surf's Up. Yeah. But I wanted to, in case anybody else was questioning that, I'm just going to cite my source. And this is from a post that Jack Riley posted. I hate that using the same word twice. On October 17th, 1996, to Pet Sounds mailing list in response to David Procopi, who responded to Jack Riley saying that the couplet was written during the recording of the moving backgrounds for the Surf's Up album. And David said, "By whom? You, Brian, Carl, Al, Van Dyke? Sorry to pester you about this, as many people on this list know. I'm a huge Smile fanatic, so these little tidbits are
David
indispensable
Procopi
to me." And Jack responded, actually, I'm going to do this in my best Jack Riley voice I can, because I've been told that I sound a little like Jack Riley. "Dave, there's no writer's credit officially given, so I am somewhat reticent about this question. How about this? It was not Brian, Carl, Jardine, Love, Johnston, Van Dyke Parks, Dennis, or Steve Desper. Perhaps you will excuse this admittedly chicken way around your question. The couplet's authorship should, of course, have been credited. It was not." And he goes on to say, "Feel the wind burn through." Actually, no, he doesn't.
No. Well, thank you, Dan from Louisville.
Thank you, Dan from Louisville.
Yeah, we go way back with Dan from Louisville, formerly of New York City.
Who at the time was also formerly of Louisville, I believe.
Back in the Pet Sounds mailing list days.
Which still exists.
Oh my God. I can't believe that.
And there were posts on it today that we're recording this, so. Well, yeah, it's still.
Well, Dan, love and mercy to you too.
Yeah. But so I wanted to get that out of the way, and something else that we probably should talk about for a little bit, especially because of the timing of our recording of the last episode, and from the time we recorded it and the time we released, of course, we received some kind of, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say sad news or just that's the way it goes news, that there was that report that was out about Brian having dementia. Brian Wilson, of course, is a Beach Boys podcast. And I said that we would address that in the next episode. So we should address it. And I really don't know what else to say other than I just hope that, well, I'm absolutely sure that Brian has so many people looking out for him and supporting him.
Well, yeah, I mean, this news came out right on the heels of what was put out by Brian's people, that Gene Sievers and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the other person, but there's two people who have been officially appointed conservators of Brian. I don't know about the other person, but Gene Sievers has been a part of Brian's inner circle for several decades now. So
Well, yeah, she was working for the Lippin Group, who was Brian's agency of record.
So, I mean,
I think she might have spun off on her own. I'm not 100% sure, though.
These are people who have been around Brian a very long time, who know him, who know Melinda. I'm sure this arrangement was all set up probably long before Melinda even took sick. This is just to ensure that Brian's personal needs, that his financial needs, that everything would be taken care of. And they didn't have to put word out, but they did. And I appreciate that this was posted on his social media, not just out to the news, but it was on the social media first so that the fans would see it first.
Yeah, of course.
And it's nice to know that. And I appreciate that consideration for the fans, because honestly, if you don't put out official word, speculation is going to run wild, such as in the case of Princess Kate.
Yeah, right. And I think the Beach Boys might have learned this themselves because of decades of speculation. And that's why there's all this vitriol out there. I think they finally learned, look, we got to address the fans to some degree.
And I mean, it's okay. Brian has dementia.
Well, that didn't come from the Gene Sievers announcement.
No, that came out in the media.
That didn't even come out from an official Brian source.
No, but it did come out in sources like Rolling Stone, like reputable sources. So if all of that is 100% true, I mean, it is what it is. And I mean, really, all that matters is that Brian is cared for, that he's staying in his home, that his children who are not adults yet are cared for.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing too is I just hope whatever happens with Brian is that he never loses his music.
Oh, I don't think he ever will.
No, I mean, just we have seen, especially in the case of Glenn Campbell.
Oh, yeah.
That and so many others. I mean, I was just reading a story recently about, I think, some people in the Chicago area who are doing research in that area, and people like in their 90s who have dementia, who don't recognize anybody, who can hardly take care of their personal needs. If you start singing a song that is a song that they loved in their life, they will pick up and sing every word, every note.
Yep.
I mean, it's some kind of miraculous thing about the way our brains work.
Oh, yeah.
And that Glenn Campbell, in his final days, if you put a guitar in his hands, he could play.
Yep.
So I just hope Brian never loses that, so that he can have that area of peace and joy in his life, no matter what else is happening to him. He deserves it. He deserves that much.
Of course. And one thing that has been in my mind recently is that given that we don't know where this information actually is sourced from, we also don't know how old it is, how new it is.
Yeah.
This could have been something that's been around for years. And what was interesting about the report is it's talking about how Brian seems to kind of lose focus and wander off, except when he's going through, say, vocal lessons or something.
It's like, so he's had dementia since 1965?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, that's
yeah, like a lot of the things in that.
Nothing in that report sounded like anything anything surprising. I don't mean to be, I'm not being silly or I'm being dead serious.
No, I had the same reaction. It's like, guys, that's Brian.
And of course, none of this is anybody's business, but also something that went through my mind was dementia doesn't necessarily limit its definition to, say, your cognitive facilities.
Yeah.
Like a case in point, like when we went to the Chicago Bears 100th anniversary thingy yeehaw a few years ago, right? 2019, I think it was, right?
Yes.
And Gale Sayers was there. He was in a wheelchair, and I was reading something about him around that time that the reason he was in a wheelchair was because of dementia. He had all his cognitive abilities still intact as far as any testing could show, but the dementia was affecting the portions of his brain that controlled body movement.
Okay, yeah, so he couldn't walk or use his hands or things very well. Yeah, I mean, there's many different forms, and it also takes a long time.
Yeah.
You don't wake up one day with dementia. For many people, it's a long, slow process.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that Brian could have been diagnosed with several years ago.
Yeah. And for all, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speculate. I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouths or anything. We don't have inside information, but for all we know, Brian mentally could still be very alert, very aware, very capable at this point. So we don't know, but all I know is, hey, he's got a lot of love around him. He's got people to take care of him. Whatever happens, I think he'll be okay as anybody in that situation can be. And there were people saying, oh, it wasn't supposed to end this way. Well, how was it supposed to end?
I mean, yeah.
Was he going to walk outside and a safe falls on him or something?
I mean,
or he was going to say, you know what? Screw all this. I'm just going to quit music from now on and just buy a fish.
I don't know. It's that kind of fan thinking that has always driven me nuts, where you create your own narrative of the object of your attention, and whatever doesn't match that narrative is completely invalid and must be attacked. And I can't stand that. So it's like, I mean, the fact is, according to, say, science, Brian should never have lived this long.
Seriously.
I mean, with all of the things, I mean, that man has like a cat with 9 lives. He has survived so much.
And hey, David Leaf told us Brian is good at adapting.
Yeah. I mean, I think as long as everything around him is set, he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And he has given us so much. I mean, what else do you want from the man?
I just want him to be happy and comfy.
Yeah. I mean, we always want more, but at some point, someone's got to be done giving.
Yeah, really.
So it's like, go listen to Pet Sounds again.
Mm-hmm.
Or Sunflower, or any number.
Or what I did a few days ago, That Lucky Old Sun.
Oh.
My second favorite Brian solo album.
See, there are things I'm not crazy about on that album, but the parts I am crazy about, that's enough for me. I can just listen to the parts I really like and skip a couple tracks, and I'm good. That album has a lot to give.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of segue into our topic. Our topic kind of came about in a discussion that I believe we had while we were walking the dog last weekend, because we usually do have discussions while we walk the dog.
There's not much else you can do.
And we were talking about, okay, what's going to be our next topic? Because we just recorded one a few weeks ago. We just put one out a few weeks ago. And there are a few topics coming up that I'm really excited about, but each is going to require some prep work. So it's like, we can't just record one now, and we don't want to wait a really long time for us to do this prep work. So we're like, okay, what's something that we can just kind of put out there without doing a lot of advance work? And you came up with
Beach Boys hot takes. And just so everybody's on the same page, I guess not everybody's familiar with the phrase hot takes, but what's a hot take? A hot take is an opinion that might be contradictory to what most people think. Case in point, here's a non-Beach Boys hot take that I personally have, and I will go to the laboratory with this because I'm a donor, remember. I signed the back of my license. So Pink Floyd was ruined by Roger Waters, and they have not had a good album since The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. There, that's an example of a hot take right there. If you want to discuss that, we'll take it off Tune X because it's off topic, or as we would say in the PSML days, 271.
Oh,
I actually used that recently, by the way.
Oh my God.
So basically a controversial Beach Boys opinion, really. That's what we're going for here. And I'd kind of like to start this off. We have discussed this to a slight degree in this podcast before, but just to kick things off, there's something that was brought up by another fan many years ago, that every Beach Boys fan has a song that they hate that every other Beach Boys fan seems to love. And of course, I've been vocal about it, mine as I get around. And I know I'm wrong. I just don't like it. I'm sorry. I know it's a great song. I know it's full of hook. And I agree that it deserves to be a number one hit. And it went to number one at the absolute most perfect can get, at the perfect time in the year, July 4th. It's America's band, but I don't like that song. I never liked it.
Yeah, it went to number one on the 4th of July in 1964.
Yep.
The summer of Beatlemania.
The summer of A Hard Day's Night.
And I believe the Beach Boys are the only American band, not American artist, because there were American singers who also had number one hits in 1964. But I'm talking about an actual band, like guitar, bass, drums band. So, yeah.
Yeah.
See, I love that song. So that's something that we have always disagreed upon.
We have.
And we disagree upon my Beach Boys song.
Oh, yes.
Marcella. Oh my God. I can't stand. You can hear the beards in that song. You can hear the cigarette
For the record,
smoke.
neither of us is a fan of the Beach Boys having facial hair.
Well, I mean, there are Dennis, of course. There were times. There were times. I'm not saying all the time. Like Pacific Ocean Blue Dennis. Yeah, he looked, anyway, as Carrie called it, hot hole in the sky.
I didn't know she was the one who coined that. Okay.
I think she was. I'm not sure, but I think she was. If not, I will attribute to her anyway.
We got to get her on the podcast.
Yes,
again.
we do. So, yeah, Marcella, I just can't. I just can't. It's like, oh, it's about a masseuse. It's about a prostitute, okay?
Well, nowadays you could say it's about a masseuse and it'd be pretty agreed upon, because nowadays you can't really say masseuse without pissing people off.
Yeah, it's like massage therapist. I just don't like that song. I don't like it on the record.
I feel so bad for you, especially the concert version.
I don't like it in concert. It's just, it goes on forever, and it's the
like
same.
2.5 minutes long.
Yeah, but it feels like it goes on forever, and it's the same thing over and over, and it's just like, ugh. It also makes me think, I don't know if this brand is still around, but a long time ago, there was a brand of toilet paper called Marcel. I know my grandmother used to buy it, so it just makes me think of toilet paper. I can't.
Wow. Well, hey, how about next we go the other way? Is there a Beach Boys song that everybody seems to hate but you love?
I don't know. Do you have an answer?
Oh, yes, I do.
What?
And I have a lot to say about it.
What?
Transcendental Meditation.
Oh, God.
I love everything about that song. It's wonderful. The musicianship is top notch, and it's understandable why. It's pretty much the Wrecking Crew, I believe. That is a killer backing track. The backing track is available by itself on, I think, Made in California. Kicks ass. And it's pure Brian Wilson genius at 100% play.
Yeah, Brian, who admitted that I tried TM, but it didn't take.
Yeah, he tried it once, and then in 1976, he's telling Mike Douglas how wonderful it is, and
telling everybody his mantra.
You're not supposed to say your mantra out loud. Mine was "I may ma," so you take your "I may ma" and.
Oh, Brian, never change.
And it's just genius because you have friends. It is one of my favorite Beach Boys albums, in my top 5. It is such a mellow album all the way through, and it's basically kind of lulling you to sleep, and then all of a sudden,
I know. It's
Brian, that is Brian's killer sense of humor right there.
It truly shows that Brian doesn't get meditation at all. I'm surprised Mike didn't hit him over the head with a bottle.
Oh, Brian knew exactly what he was doing. Don't even try to tell me he didn't get what meditation is. I think that was his way of putting us on. I really especially because there's a really bad edit in the middle for no reason whatsoever, like drops of beats during the wordless part. And I love it. I can't get, and then you have these people saying, friends should have ended with "I went to sleep" instead. Shut up, all of you. It's Brian and his sense of humor and his genius. It's perfect.
No, I think TM song is a better Brian humor thing.
Okay, I do like that.
Because like TM song, that almost sounds like it could have been like a Smile outtake. Just like the Smile era, some little found track where because it's kind of silly and it speeds up and slows down
which sounds more like a Smiley Smile thing.
And the argument in the beginning, yeah, but it doesn't sound like mildew because
not all of Smiley Smile sounds like mildew.
Yes, it does. Anyway, yeah, maybe that's my thing. I just don't like Smiley Smile.
Yeah.
Lots of people like Smiley Smile. I am not one of them.
I like it. I don't love it. And speaking of which, I'd like to bring up this other hot take here. What happened with Smile and Smiley Smile, including 2004 and 2011? That is exactly what should have happened with that music. Period. People weren't we've talked about this before. People weren't going to be ready for it by 1966, 1967.
Well, I agree with that part. Everybody keep in mind, Sean and I were not around at the time.
We're Gen Xers.
All of our perspective of things in the 60s comes from perspective, from looking at the whole landscape. So we weren't there at the time. And a lot of the historical things that we were exposed to made the 60s sound like everybody was running around with flowers in their hair and peace signs and long hair and flowy clothes and all this stuff, where really people in 1967 were still, okay, I don't want to say so much conservative, but because the tide was changing just much slower than the history, especially what we got in the 80s, tells us.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, case in point, in American Bandstand, I think it was early January of 1967 when Dick Clark played the Strawberry Fields video. So this was like when Strawberry Fields Forever just came out.
Mm-hmm.
And did he play Penny Lane too?
I want to say he did.
Okay. So these were shown on American Bandstand and screened for their studio audience. The reactions of the teenagers were like, we don't like the mustaches. Like that music is kind of weird. Like they were kind of freaked out by it.
I love that one kid who said, they look like my grandfather.
I mean, it's not like they hated it.
I think they did.
But they were kind of perplexed. And I know that's just one tiny example, but still, we're kids at the dawn of 1967, totally ready for a new change. And I mean, when you really look at things, for all of the Beatles' popularity, Sgt. Pepper still was a risk. It could have bombed.
Mm-hmm.
It really could have. And when you look at that music compared to what the Beatles had done, okay, Revolver may have been a preparation because Revolver had things like Tomorrow Never Knows.
Oh, did it ever?
And had Dr. Robert, you had
Love You Too with all the sitars and everything.
I mean, and even what they had done going back into 65. But like the Beatles were slowly changing, but still, especially kind of taking that break and not really putting much out for a while, where the media was like, are the Beatles over? The clip I absolutely love.
Oh, yeah.
When a reporter was stopping the Beatles as they were arriving at Abbey Road. And it's like, are the Beatles breaking up? And George practically laughs in the guy's face. He's like, no, he was going in to record A Day in the Life. Like,
Well, we think at least.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if we have a date on that.
Well, I mean, the fact that it was nighttime when they were going in, and we know A Day in the Life, like the recording session was practically a big party. So, but still, it's like early 1967, were people really ready for a change? We've talked about how if Smile had come out the day before Sgt. Pepper, it could have bombed. If it came out the day after Sgt. Pepper, it would have been called a copycat.
Yep.
I don't know if there would have been any win of Smile coming out in 1967.
Who knows? But I do firmly believe that Brian did exactly what he should have done with Smiley Smile. Even if Smile had been finished, pressed, released, and everything, we still would have gotten something, I think, eventually that year that had a little bit of a Smiley Smile feel to it. Because if you listen to the Smile sessions as they progressed, the deeper into 1967 Brian got, going from January through May, the more restrained the music sounded and the more fragmented it sounded, and really the more like Smiley Smile it sounded. There was a very, very thin line between the end of Smile and the beginning of Smiley Smile. And there is not much time in between. Brian started working on Smiley Smile, I want to say, in June.
Well, yeah.
And Smile was ended in May.
It was pretty soon after. I don't listen to Smiley Smile and think that it just feels kind of like a cop-out. That he took tracks that were beautifully done for Smile and then just kind of trashed them. The sound quality isn't good. A lot of them sound, I mean, I'm not kidding when I say it sounds like mildew. It sounds murky. It sounds muddy. I've heard Smiley Smile and it doesn't make me feel good. I mean, even Heroes and Villains and Good Vibrations sound just kind of, I don't know, like, that's a terrible way of saying it, but
it's the same like Good Vibrations that was a single.
But it's like in with those other tracks, they're diminished somehow. And I don't like the artwork. I don't like anything about it. If you're going to shelve Smile, just shelve it and go on to Wild Honey. Like, don't even try to put something out. Just go right to Wild Honey. Because that was a much better kind of, okay, guys, let's all chill out here. Or kind of like how, again, the Beatles put out this wonderfully artistic, ambitious Sgt. Pepper. And then their next album was basically pulling way back to things that were simpler, more acoustic.
Kind of like what Brian did with Smiley Smile.
Yeah, but the White Album still sounded good.
Well, it helps that it was recorded in a real recording studio, while Brian recorded Smiley Smile in an unfinished home recording studio. And he was still piecing it together at the time they recorded it.
I also just think some of his mental health issues were just getting to him.
I'm sure
that he was just scattered and he didn't have the kind of organization that he had for things like Pet Sounds or even Good Vibrations. That it's like he had, instead of putting together a beautifully sewn complex garment, he had piles of fabric pieces and pattern pieces scattered all over the floor that could have been put together in any number of ways into a beautiful garment, but he just didn't know how to do it, or he didn't trust himself to pick up pieces and start sewing.
Okay, then let me ask you this. I do not disagree with you a bit with that assessment, but how did Brian manage to pull things together and get Wild Honey going? I mean, yeah, people say, oh, that was produced by the Beach. Well, that's what the credits said, but Brian was still pretty much calling the shots.
Well, do we know that?
The session tapes are out there.
Oh, okay.
Plus, the album credit was originally going to read produced by Brian Wilson.
Probably because he kind of stepped back a little bit. He took a completely different direction. He was working, for the most part. I know there are a few things on Wild Honey that had their genesis in the Smile era, but still, he just kind of backed away from the whole thing and just did something totally different. And it's almost like he was just trying a different direction that really worked very well.
Oh, I love the result.
But I think he just kind of needed to do that. I mean, I just think back to myself during the pandemic. I was making a blanket and I wasn't happy. And it was at a time when my mental health was really not well. And I just said, you know what? I'm not going to keep making this thing if it doesn't make me happy. I'm going to put it aside and make something totally different. And I did. And it was one of my favorite things I've ever made. It's just what I needed to do at the time. And then, like, about a year later, I picked up on that first blanket again and finished it. Because that was the time to do it. So that thing, Brian may have needed to just do something totally different and just step away from anything that had to do with Smile. Again, with the exception of bringing in a couple bits and pieces.
Like Mama says.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, hey, what was it, Bruce Johnston, who said that Wild Honey was music for Brian to mellow out by?
Exactly.
So, yeah. I hate to monopolize the conversation here, but there's
you're going to.
I guess I'm going to, because there's one that I have to get off my chest that I have spoken publicly about, not on this podcast, I don't think, but I don't think the Beach Boys Today is really that good of an album. I really don't. Is it a turning point for Brian? Oh, yes, it is. It absolutely is. I guess it has to hold a special place in my heart because the Beach Boys Today was released exactly 33 years before you and I met in person. So, of course, it has that connection to us, and it has Please Let Me Wonder, which was our first dance at our wedding reception. So, of course, it's got that. But to me, the Beach Boys Today, first of all, the sound quality is pretty bad. It sounds all muffled. And I imagine that it was, in fact, I'm almost 100% sure, especially when we researched the 1965 episode we did last year. I seem to remember many of the tracks got multiple reduction mixes, which means lots of generational tape loss there. So there wasn't much you could do about that. A lot of it was on 3 tracks, if not all of it. Actually, some of it might have been on 4, but the sound isn't all that good. And a good deal of the album, in fact, I think I was kind of talking about this before. The Beach Boys Today is to the Beach Boys what Bookends was to Simon and Garfunkel. So many Simon and Garfunkel fans think that Bookends is this amazing, brilliant album when it's only really half an album. The other half is just a holding tank for singles and B-sides are singles, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the same for the Beach Boys Today, because how many of it is just basically packaging the singles and 4 by the Beach Boys onto an album side, pretty much.
And it also has probably one of the worst album covers of all time.
Oh my goodness.
Where they basically took a picture from what was probably the sessions for the photo shoots for the Christmas album, because they're wearing the same sweaters.
They're not the same sweaters.
I thought they were.
No, they're not.
Well, okay, they're wearing sweaters, and most of the picture is cropped out with just brown.
Yeah.
Like, what? I don't understand.
Oh, and also, did I mention this in a previous episode? Plus, 3 great new songs by Brian Wilson.
Yeah, there's...
One of those is Bull Session with the Big Daddy. Another one, I think, is I'm So Young, which is not a Beach Boys. It's a cover. It's not by Brian.
Kind of my thing about it, and this became especially clear with the twofer, that you had Today and Summer Days and Summer Nights. So it's kind of like this document of Brian in 1965, because, well, much of Today they began recording it in late 64, I believe.
Yep.
But so you had Brian at that time. Okay. Brian had just quit the road, and he probably was just all up in his head about a lot of things. He had just gotten married to a teenager.
Yep.
And why did he marry Marilyn?
Because he was insecure.
Because he was insecure. He thought she was flirting with Mike and was going to leave him and all this stuff. So it's like he was blowing his cool left and right. It's almost like he needed to be home for a little while and kind of get into his groove of working just on studio stuff and not having to run around and travel and play concerts and do promotions and all these other things. I mean, he still did things once in a while, but his main job was now studio stuff. And I think he needed a little bit of time to really fit into that and kind of get his groove. And also, I'll be honest, he needed a time to just like smoke a couple joints and mellow out. But the songs that he had on Today, I mean, you have Kiss Me Baby about this painful breakup.
Mm-hmm.
She Knows Me Too Well, which I'm sure was about him and Marilyn and insecurities there. And yeah, when you listen to that and just think about if it's about Marilyn, oh my God, like,
wow,
this is a guy who is just all full of stuff. And the album is very telling of Brian, but it's like, this is the insecure, crying in the corner, eating pound cake Brian. But then you have Summer Days and Summer Nights, which is the tall, confident, handsome, with his hair perfect, that Brian, where every song sounds like just the sun shining on your face.
Mm-hmm.
And every song is just about going out and having fun and, you're so good to me. Like, that's also a Marilyn song. It has to be. You're kind of small and you're such a doll. That's a song about, like,
I think Brian's friggin' tall. Everybody's small next to him.
But I mean, it's like, that's such a happy song. And you have Girl Don't Tell Me. You've got California Girls. You've got all these songs that are just so brimming with confidence.
Yeah.
So it's like the yin and the yang. It's the two sides of the Gemini. If you're going to have a portrait of Brian in his music, there you go right there. Those two albums are a perfect representation of where Brian was at in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's a Beach Boys album, but it's all about Brian.
Yeah, to me, though, when people always refer to, the Beach Boys today, that was the precursor to Pet Sounds. Maybe lyrically it was. Musically, it's definitely Summer Days,
but
Summer
again,
Nights.
I think Brian was still developing. He needed time to settle into his style. And now that he really would have time to work the studio and to work on sessions with the Wrecking Crew and get things like hammered out before the Beach Boys got back from the road so that he could have them come in and do vocals, or like if he wanted Carl to lay down a guitar track or whatever, he could be more ready for them because he would have had more time to work out the kinks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he needed time to do that and to just see where his potential was. And that in itself is what led to Pet Sounds, to be able to have 450 musicians crammed into Western 3
mm-hmm.
to do all kinds of strings and horns and timpanis and water bottles and all that stuff.
But still, I mean, I'm listening to the Beach Boys today and I'm listening to Summer Days and Summer Nights, and I'm wondering how someone could say the Beach Boys today is the stronger album when you have Bolt Session with the Big Daddy on that thing.
Oh, God. Filler.
And such bad quality. And I don't care what anybody says. I will fight forever for this. There is not a single note of filler on Summer Days and Summer Nights. Well, what about I'm bugged at my old man? Well, what about Shut Your Face?
That is so not filler.
No, it is not.
That is so absolutely. That is like, talk about the state of Brian's union.
Seriously. I wrote a review of Summer Days and Summer Nights because the Endless Harmony forum, which spun off of the defunct, I don't remember what the previous forum was called, but
wasn't it called Pet Sounds?
It might have been. It probably was, actually, but there's a thread on that forum that is nothing but album reviews. And I posted a pretty long one for Summer Days and Summer Nights. I'm not going to read it here because it'll take forever, but I will link it in our show notes at tunex.fab4it.com. But long story short is, I feel that Summer Days and Summer Nights is, if nothing else, will prove to you what a genius Brian Wilson was and what people he had around him to nurture that genius, especially Mike Love. That is what you're going to listen to. It is a wonderful album that details a day during summer vacation, if you listen to it from start to finish. The only thing I would change about it is that I would flip-flop Salt Lake City and Then I Kissed Her, because second track on the album, Amusement Parks USA. A day in the summer, a lot of kids want to go to the amusement park. If you put Salt Lake City on right after that song, you go from a song about amusement parks to a song about a specific metro area that has, I believe to this day, a very popular amusement park that is mentioned in that song, the Lagoon.
Yeah.
So if you play through the album in that order, You have a day in the summer, a day of summer vacation. You have one kid writing a letter to a girl he met when he was out visiting his grandmother. You have Then I Kissed Her, which, even though it's a cover, it is a perfect fit for this album, with the person in mind basically implying that, hey, I think this is going to be my wife. You have I'm Bugged at My Old Man. That's you get home, you can imagine someone's dad like coming down on you for you forgot to mow the lawn, you didn't do this, you didn't take the garbage out, you stayed out too late.
Yeah.
And you're all like, whatever, you go to bed, you're bugged.
Yeah.
And your dream comes true. That could be, say, on that same day, the girl of the person who was kissed. One more summer and your dream comes true, as in, oh, you're going to get a ring.
Or maybe her little sister, who's seeing her older sister go out and do the things that she wants to do.
Or that.
And it's like, next summer, you're going to be old enough to do these things too. That's kind of what I get, that you're like, you're just on the verge. Just be a little patient. It's going to come. I mean, I love that. I love that song.
Mm-hmm.
And they sing it so beautifully.
So yeah, that's my hot take. Summer days, summer nights, much better than today.
And of course, the greatest bonus track, The Little Girl I Once Knew.
Oh my goodness.
Which, again, is about like, okay, a girl now who's all kind of hot. A few years ago, she was the kid who wasn't old enough to do these things. Now she is, and it's like, hey.
And again, I have to mention this. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but my dream EP, the 1965 EP to end all EPs, period. You would have California Girls, Let 'Em Run Wild, Little Girl I Once Knew, and Guess I'm Dumb. Oh,
that's a dangerous.
Yeah, listen to that and tell me if you survive.
That's a dangerous set of work there.
What we just talked about here, we talked about the Beach Boys Today, we talked about Summer Days and Summer Nights, we talked about Smile, we talked about Smiley Smile, we talked about Wild Honey. What do all those albums have in common? I will tell you.
That they weren't put out in full dimensional Capitol stereo.
That they were not put out in full dimensional Capitol stereo until the first one that happened in 1997. Why were they not put out in full dimensional Capitol stereo?
Oh boy, this is a large topic.
Yeah, and I have a hot take on that.
Okay.
Tell me why they weren't put out in stereo. Come on, I dare you.
You dare me?
Try it. Just try me.
What are you, 12? I'm not going to be all like that, because there's multiple schools of thought.
Yeah.
One of them.
They're all wrong.
Like, one of them is that Brian did not mix things in stereo, and there probably wasn't time for the tracks to be delivered for somebody else to do it.
You and everything, because that is exactly what I was going to say. You did not say the wrong thing. You said the right thing. You didn't say, well, because Brian couldn't hear out of it. It's like, yeah, well, yeah, but he had other people do it.
Yeah.
He had Chuck and other folks do that.
Yeah.
Well, it's because Brian feels that it's not a complete work. No, come on. But it is because that is the reason right there, boy howdy. There was no time.
Why are you getting all growly with me?
I'm not getting growly with you. I'm getting growly with everybody else. Because what you said is exactly why. That is my hot take. The reason that those albums were not put out in stereo wasn't because of Brian not liking stereo. It's like, oh, it's mono. That's how you no, there was no time.
Well, no, it's not that Brian didn't like stereo. Brian actually cannot hear stereo. So it's not something he can work in. He has to have somebody else mix it.
Yeah, which he did have before. He did that all the way from the Surfin' USA album up through and including the concert album, the Christmas album, and right around when they started putting out music in stereo, number one, Brian was not calling all of the shots anymore. Number two, it was coming at a time when mono was being phased out anyway.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, if you look at the recording sessions and the session dates for those albums between 1965 and 1967, pretty much there was just barely a month between the time the last session happened and the time the album came out. That is not a lot of time to put together an album's worth of material, to select the songs, to mix the songs, to master them, to take care of the banding, have the records pressed, have the sleeves pressed, get the promotional materials out. There was barely time to do anything, let alone mix everything for mono and then say, okay, now we got to mix everything for stereo again for people who have record players that can play back in stereo. How much of the Beach Boys' target audience had stereo record players?
Well, yeah, at that time, sure. I think this definitely holds up for Pet Sounds because Pet Sounds wasn't finished until the end of March, yet it hit the streets on May 16th. So there was no time to do a stereo mix, but I also still would give credence to that Brian wanted to have it his way. I would still buy, for Pet Sounds, I would buy that rationale that, like, it was okay with him that it wasn't released in stereo, but I'm glad it finally was. That there was a stereo mix done with his approval. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he could still have it done and just listen to like a fold down just to make sure it still sounded okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if that were truly Brian's attitude, then why did he not go back to mono when he was definitely in complete control? Because I remember when
what do you mean? What year are you talking about?
I'm using the descriptor completely in control, a little bit loosely given his circumstances. But I remember when he was a guest on the Stephen Gary show, it was early 90s, possibly late 80s. And there was one caller who said, "Oh, Brian, I love your solo album. It's so great. You should have done it in mono." And he just kind of chuckled at that. But
well, the thing is, so we're talking about 1988.
Yes.
Okay. The effect would have been lost because, okay, you're saying who in 1965 had, how many people had a stereo receiver in 1988? I mean, okay, I had a receiver with a stereo mono switch, but most people probably did not.
No.
At that time, that would have been kind of laughed at, I think. Nowadays, that would have been a little, it would have been a little different because it would be like, oh, it's vintage and da-da-da. But in 1988, it would have been very 5 minutes ago as opposed to vintage. You see the difference?
Yeah, and I can give you one. I'm going to be honest. I generally prefer stereo over mono. To me, it's a case-by-case basis. Some mixes sound better in mono, some sound better in stereo. But I can think of one perfect example of support for making mono a thing again. You know those JBL clip speakers people have, including us?
Yeah.
One speaker. They attach their bikes, they go jogging with. Hey, wouldn't that be cool to have a mono mix for that?
That's now. I'm not. That is now. I'm talking about 1988.
I know, and I'm just saying. I'm just making an observation.
In 1988, people would have been like, "What?"
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I only really knew what mono was from my Monkees records because I had one that was in mono and it said so on the back, and it's like, oh, okay, and I think I asked my dad, like, what does that mean? And he showed me the stereo mono switch. And it's like, oh, okay. But it wasn't really something that was part of my knowledge as a teenager in the 80s.
Right.
Because even though mono had been phased out, not terribly, not that long ago, it just completely dropped out of sight for younger people who grew up later.
And of course, the interesting thing is like modern music nowadays, even though you can tell it's stereo, there's not really much separation. It might as well be friggin' mono anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on what you're listening to it on.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got a good setup at home, that's one thing. If you have really nice, like the Bose computer speakers that we have, okay. But and I mean, yeah, like our phones and iPad and stuff like that has stereo capability, but it still doesn't sound all that divided.
I'm saying even if you're listening in stereo, like modern music, the way it's mixed these days, there's hardly any real separation to it.
Oh, you're saying where you have two distinct things going on. Yeah, like
you ask someone, okay, what do you hear in the left channel? Now what do you hear in the right channel?
Okay, I get what you're saying.
Be like, oh yeah, it's pretty much the same. And there is one thing that at least one thing Brian did in more modern times that was released only in mono, or a couple of things actually. In My Moon Dreams, the kind of quasi-instrumental that Andy Paley wrote.
Andy Paley did for that Pulp Surfing.
Yes, I was trying to think what that was. And this song, Wants to Sleep With You Tonight, that was on a European EP that came out around the time of I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Those were both in mono. And of course, those were both Paley collaborations. So I imagine that would have been a Paley push, if you will. I just invented that term right now, by the way.
Paley push.
Because I think something about those Andy Paley recordings was he was trying to make Brian sound 1965, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Oh, and speaking of Andy Paley, I don't know if you'll have much to say about this because I know you really haven't done a lot of digging into the Andy Paley stuff.
No.
But for, I can't say unreasonable reason, when people hear Brian Wilson and Andy Paley, they think, oh, that's going to be so good. And I can't blame them because what's one thing they did together? Rio Grande. That was a Wilson Paley composition. Yep. So, of course, in the mid-90s, when all those sessions that Brian did with Andy Paley and a couple of cases the Beach Boys got leaked. And, I love the story about that because they were watermarked, so they knew exactly who leaked them. Long story short, one version of it sounds good but plays back fast, and another version sounds like garbage but plays back at the right speed. That's how they watermarked it. But I remember in the 90s, like those were like the hot items in trading circles, and people who heard them were like, "Oh, this is great. Why is this not out? Why did the Beach Boys not continue this direction and all this?" And I'm going to say this much: they're not that great. They're really not all that great. They sound a little bit too forced retro, and Brian sounds like garbage on them because that was when his voice was still kind of in that weird transitional phase, like that. He still had that "I just broke away from Landy" voice. So he's like, "It's not easy being me." He's like kind of growling the lyrics out.
He had to kind of learn how to modulate again.
Yeah. He sounds too hyper on them, I don't know. But there is a reason that the only songs that came from those sessions that actually got official release were this song, Wants to Sleep With You Tonight. Fun fact, by the way, originally called Hotels of Hawaii, and In My Moon Dreams. Oh, and here's another thing. And eventually, You're Still a Mystery, which really, that is a wonderful, fabulous song. I was glad that came out. But they did not use the version that was recorded in the mid-90s. They used the one that Brian overdubbed a newer vocal onto circa 1998, when I believe it was being considered for Imagination. So the vocal sounds a lot better. So, yeah, even when they released that, they used a different vocal take.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like what I have heard of that stuff. It's like, yeah, it's good, but it's a bit much.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was more on Brian's side or more on Andy Paley's side, because let's face it, what exactly did Andy Paley do for Rio Grande? Because that is so incredibly Brian. Like, I don't even get what else somebody could have contributed to that. You know, did he get coffee or something?
I don't know, but his name, the credit is Brian Wilson, Andy Paley.
No, I know what the credit is.
It's not even that they took Landy's name off the credits. His name was never on the credits.
Which is why on that album, that track always stood out to me because it obviously was not Landy-fied, which I kind of wonder how did they all get away with that?
I don't know. Hey, it could have been Lenny Waronker heard that and said, "This is perfect. Don't touch it."
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, folks, but the Paley stuff isn't all that good. No disrespect meant to Andy Paley, but it just doesn't really. It needed polishing. I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah.
And wow, that's interesting how we transition from Smile to that to Paley. Now, here are two things that I want to say that I know a lot of people disagree with. One, there was actually a little bit of a discussion on the Ceylon Podcast's Facebook forum, and this. I swear, this was in my notes for this episode before this happened. Something about Ceylon. I think Wyatt has spies planted on us because there was something that we were talking about doing for a future episode, and then I heard Nia D'Amelio was going to do it for one of their Patreon episodes after we talked. I was like, what? So get out of our heads, people. But anyway, First of all, 15 big ones. 15 big ones. And yeah, I understand why people are disappointed with it. And I kind of had an attitude. I mean, mind you, I was not familiar with 15 big ones until about 1989, 1990 when I checked it out at a library. But the thing is, I kind of always enjoyed it. I always did, even before when I knew what the context of it was, when I didn't know what the context of it was. It's really a fun album to listen to, especially if you can get past Brian's voice, which thankfully doesn't rear its ugly head a lot on the album. You don't even hear it till the end of Had to Phone Ya. I mean, yeah, it's not what you would think the Beach Boys would follow up Holland with, but keep in mind, 15 Big Ones came out 3.5 years after Holland.
Well, really, was it a follow-up to Holland or was it a follow-up to Endless Summer?
It was a follow-up to Endless Summer.
Yeah, there's a big difference. And I mean, again, we're going by historical perspective. Even though both of us were alive in 1976, we were both tiny children.
Yeah, I wasn't even 2 years old when this album came out.
But I mean, I do remember 1976 because it was like the Star-Spangled Yeehaw of all time.
Yeah.
Everything. The vacuum cleaner my mother bought that year, the bag had like eagles and Liberty Bells printed all over it. I had Barbie outfits that were red, white, and blue. The bicentennial and the Olympics, and just, it was crazy. And I think it really was like people were so worn out by all the mess of the last decade. It's like just to have some reasons to really, as a nation, kind of just party and celebrate and look at like some positive, happy things in the midst of a lot. I mean, I'm not saying 1976 was a perfect year. There were still plenty of problems in our country and around the world, but I guess people just kind of wanted some pleasant distractions for a little while.
Oh, sure.
And the Beach Boys, I mean, considering that they wouldn't have even been arrested 5 or 6 years earlier, and they were embraced again, and they would have been complete fools to not take advantage of that.
Of course.
I mean, they were playing sold out arenas that year.
Yep.
I mean, that's a far cry to 1971 when a bunch of fans had to pool their money to get them booked at Carnegie Hall.
But they got them to sell out, though.
Well, of course, because there were still plenty of people. But the fact is, the promoters, the people who normally do this work, weren't interested. A bunch of people had to get together and push it themselves. And then things like getting the blessing of the Grateful Dead and those kinds of things that kind of got the Beach Boys revving again. But it's like, I don't know. I mean, you can talk about artistry all you want, but you also got to strike while the iron is hot when you're a celebrity, when you're a big deal act, because nothing's guaranteed and nothing is forever. I mean, I just finished reading a couple months ago. I finished reading Henry Winkler's memoirs. Now, this is the guy who was the Fonz, who has gone on to do movie roles and television roles that are beloved, that he's gotten shelves full of awards for, that he's gotten acclaim for books he's written and all these things. And yet he admits in his book that he's always afraid that, okay, I have a great job now, but what about when that ends? What about when this show or this movie ends? What do I do now? Like, he's always afraid he's going to be broken out of work. So it's like, you got to keep taking the opportunities as they come. And I don't think the Beach Boys could have turned down what was being offered to them in 1976.
Especially because it's something that you and I have talked offline about. One who was probably most willing to do that was Mike Love, simply because he has seen what it's like to have a great life and then have it all taken away from you with his father.
Because his father lost his business where they lost their house.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows what that's like. I mean, you know, that's the thing when you see somebody like Mike who, I mean, I know earlier in my time in the fandom, people always criticized his relentless touring, but it's like, when you've been broke, you don't ever want to be broke again.
Oh, yeah.
Was it the right decision? I don't know. But the fact is, the Beach Boys have been touring pretty much consistently ever since. And that's 48 years later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in some way, it was the right thing to do. And they're still selling out large venues.
Yep.
It's not like they're playing street festivals. They're not playing little dinky things like a lot of bands of their era do. Or they don't have to like lump on to Happy Together tours with like Peter Noon or something. Yeah. Like they don't have to tour with other people. They still can go out and put the Beach Boys on a marquee and people are going to buy tickets.
Yep.
I know they've done those oldies cruises and stuff because that's probably a huge pot of money and probably also a lot of fun. I'm sure It's not a bad deal. Oh yeah, play some gigs and be on a Caribbean cruise. I mean, that's not a bad deal. But
I'm surprised that Mike would do that, though, given that cruise lines are probably the worst polluters ever.
I don't know.
Unless maybe they've come up with much better ways to do things. I don't know.
I don't really know. But I kind of posted about this a little bit, I think, or I don't remember if I posted this or if we were just talking about it. But it's like the things that made the early 70s a very fertile, creative time for the Beach Boys, even with Brian really kind of dropping back and not being as prolific as he had been. You had Jack Riley, who really fostered a lot of great stuff and kind of put them with people that they had never really worked with before and made introductions and things that they might not have done otherwise. And then you also had Blondie and Ricky.
Yep.
And bringing in the whole flame thing and that sound and that feel that Carl really got involved with. By 1976, those three people were long gone from the Beach Boys camp. So it's like what kind of really helped foster that creativity was already gone. And also, again, I was a tiny kid in the early 70s, so I don't really have the I was there perspective on this, but at least from where I'm sitting, 1973 and 1976 were really different, especially in terms of music. So the music they were making in 1973, they would have had to change for 1976 because the same sound probably wouldn't really have sold by then.
Well, yeah, like the sound the sounds they were doing from like 71 through 73 were perfect for
71 through 73.
For 71, 73 and your AOR FM radio formats.
And I know there, like when you had posted some things, there was somebody who had replied who mentioned like, 15 big ones never would have been played on FM radio. Well, the whole FM radio thing where you had DJs who talked like this and played like an entire album and would have commercials for rolling papers and things like that. How long did that era actually last? That whole FM thing. It didn't last very long, did it?
I was not there, so I don't... the fact that I was not there, and I was born in the 70s, so that tells you how long it lasted.
I don't think that whole thing survived much beyond, say, the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
I don't think DJs really were given that level of freedom for very long. So... Again, 15 big ones wouldn't have been played on an FM station because FM stations weren't like that by that time almost anyway. I mean, there are times I think, the Beach Boys didn't keep up with the times, but maybe they did more than I realize.
Yeah, seriously. And again, the fact that they sold out concerts and that the album 15 Big Ones went to number 8 on the Billboard 200. It was a hit album, like it or not. It scored better than Pet Sounds.
And Rock and Roll Music went to number 5.
Yep.
Even though, talk about a song where you can hear the beards. Oh my good Lord.
You can hear the beards and the beer. That song sounds like beer.
And the cigarettes. But again, I keep going back to when we went to the Beach Boys and Ringo Starr doing a show at Ravinia in 2019. I mean, that show wasn't our cup of tea because of what we loved so much about Brian's shows. But you know what? it was a full house and people were having a damn good time. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you want artistry, but you also want people to have a damn good time, don't you? Because they're the ones who are going to remember the music. They're the ones who are going to go out and buy a copy of Sounds of Summer or whatever the latest, greatest hits. And maybe a few of them might pick up a copy of Pet Sounds too, or download a copy of Pet Sounds.
Yeah, just to show you. I mean, my favorite span of Beach Boys is from 1965 to 1973. But you know what got me listening to the Beach Boys? 1963 to 1964 Beach Boys.
Well, also...
That's what sucked me in.
Well, what sucked me in? Endless Summer.
Oh, yeah. When
I was like a tiny kid and my dad bought several copies of the 8-track and had them in each car and in the house. I was raised on that, and that was what I started with, and that is what led me to other things.
Yeah, and seriously, I know I brought this up when we did our episode about double albums, but I'm going to say it again because it's worth it. If you listen to Endless Summer, that album, in one sitting, you will be exhausted from being bombarded by hit after hit after hit. And you're going to be just blown away. It's like, holy cow, it's amazing. These were all hits.
Well, yeah, because almost every song on every song on Endless Summer is either an A-side or a B-side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
a couple of exceptions, but yeah.
I mean, like
All Summer Long, I don't think was ever a single.
And see, that's the thing. A song that great.
But it was in American Graffiti though, so that kind of warrants its inclusion.
That might be why, but still. That should have been a single. Like the fact that the Beach Boys had album tracks that were that good.
Yeah, seriously.
But I mean, they kind of did Beatles, like they out Beatles one Beatle.
They outwon one before one happened.
They outwon one before there was one.
They out 1962 to 1966, 1962 to 1966 there.
Yeah, there you go. And it didn't even have good vibrations on it until the CD. The CD.
Which I have my own opinions on with what they did there. But anyway, just playing 15 big ones. I just got to say, I like a lot of it. There's some of it I don't like, but I really do like a lot of the songs on there. And that same song is one of my all-time favorite Beach Boys songs.
That is fun.
Especially the version that was in the TV special that doesn't have a title yet. People still insist on calling It's Okay, even though the phrase It's Okay appears nowhere in the credits or in the TV Guide articles.
Okay, calm down.
Sorry.
I mean, It's Okay is truly one of my favorites now. And
that's a great track.
And I never really gave it much attention until that day. Mm-hmm. The first year that we had the Beach Boys channel, or at least the first year we had the Beach Boys channel when I had Sirius XM, because I think there had been an earlier one before we had the satellite radio. And I was driving to work the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. I was just worn out by my school year, because May is a tough month because there's so much to do and you're close to the end, but you have so much to do before the school year can actually end. So I was just really weary, and I'm driving to work down Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and that song came on just as I was getting close to the North Avenue exit. When you're driving south on Lakeshore Drive, you have North Avenue Beach on the left, and then not too far away in the distance, you have Navy Pier with the big Ferris wheel. So it's just, you have this beautiful summer view, and it was a gorgeous day. Gorgeous morning out, and it gave me life to hear that song, and it just fit the moment so perfectly. And I was like, okay, let me get through this day, and then I can have a 3-day weekend, because in Chicago the beaches are open for the summer with the lifeguards on duty starting Memorial Day weekend. So it's beach time, summer's coming, the end of the school year's coming. I can do this. And I will always be grateful to that song for that moment.
It's okay.
Yeah. And again, thanks to the Beach Boys channel, I have gotten to like Hadophonia.
Oh, I love Hadophonia.
I like the sound of that. It's a pretty cool song.
Do you know why that song was written?
Why?
Because Marilyn was off in Europe somewhere. I don't remember if it was for spring or what. And Brian missed her, and he wrote that song because he missed her.
Aww.
Yeah.
So it's kind of...
It dates back to like 73 or something.
So it's kind of not like Paul writing a song because he was pissy that he called Jane Asher and her line was busy.
Yes, I'm sure that was the only problem he had. Good grief. Get over it, man.
But yeah, I'm still not going to hold it up as one of their best, but I don't dislike it or the idea of it as much as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Except I really don't like that on the cover, Brian's got his big old hairy chest showing.
Oh, man, this greasy ass hair. Yeah. Oh, man, that's one of the worst pictures of Brian.
Yeah.
Someone had to look at that and say, yes, that is what we're going to put on the front cover.
And it's like their pictures, like they look so Sears Portrait Studio.
Yeah.
Like the photography. But I do dig what Teen Torrance was getting at with that design.
Yeah, and of course the Olympic rings, because there was a Summer Olympics year too. So, oh man, it was like the perfect storm. The retro movement, the bicentennial, oh my goodness, just everything happening together at the same time.
Just kind of maybe thinking, all right, maybe we're turning a corner and things are a little bit better now. But of course, the late 70s had a bunch of problems of its own. But for a moment, I think people kind of were like happy.
And before we go to the next hot take here, something I just want to kind of pimp here is on another podcast I do from time to time, I had a discussion with a friend about 15 Big Ones, pretty deep. We did a short one. Well, we did, I think, an hour and 40 minutes on it. And it's my friend Ferg, who is the host of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, which is a wonderful podcast. I will link that discussion we had about 15 Big Ones in the episode's show notes at tunex.fab4it.com. And so I think we've given 15 Big Ones enough attention for now. I have a similar hot take about another album that the Beach Boys put out.
Oh boy.
Still Cruisin'. Not many people care much about Still Cruisin'. I know Giggins was out there with his petition to get Still Cruisin' and Summer in Paradise reissued and all that, but whatever. Here's the thing. I really think Still Cruisin', I'm not necessarily saying it's a good album or anything or a bad album. What I'm saying is that it was genius. I don't know if it was intended genius or not, but think about this. It has only a handful of new songs on it, but in 1989, Kokomo was still still fresh in everybody's mind. You can imagine somebody saying, man, I really don't have any Beach Boys in my collection. I would love to get a Beach Boys album that has Kokomo on it and some of their earlier hits too and all that. Guess what? Still Cruisin' had Kokomo. Wouldn't it be nice?
Well, it also had an excellent video component because the Kokomo video was in heavy rotation on MTV. I saw that video a lot. It was filmed at the Grand Floridian at Disney World, and you had John Stamos in it because he was on Full House at the time, and people were like, oh, that's Blackie from General Hospital and all this stuff. But then you had the Still Cruisin' video and the tie-in with the contest that VH1 was running, where you could win I don't know what.
Was it 36 Corvettes or something?
Yeah, like basically a Corvette every year of Corvette that had been
every
produced.
Model year, yeah.
Every model year. I still remember they had the cars all lined up out in the desert somewhere.
Yep.
And this big sweeping camera overhead view of all the cars and a pretty good song that went with it. And it was definitely a great promotional piece that probably worked very well at the time.
Yeah. And looking at the track list, of course, you have Still Cruisin', the title track. It's like, oh, okay, it's that song from their new contest and all that, which that song went to number 93, by the way. So at least it charted. Island Girl. Of course, someone looking at the back cover is going to see Island Girl. Oh, I want to hear their take on that Elton John song, even though it's not the Elton John song. It's got Kokomo in it. Great. In My Car. Oh, I love that song. Of course, it's the Mandela effect going on there. That's a brand new song, but it's by Brian. So if you notice that in the credits, oh, is that a new Brian song? And Wipeout, which people probably remember from their single a few years prior. And I get around Wouldn't It Be Nice in California Girls. And if there's no other reason for Still Cruisin' to exist, it's that it's one of the few places you can get that obscure mix of Wouldn't It Be Nice that they had to use because the master for the original version was missing. So you had that really weird one. It's that take that's on the Pet Sound sessions when Brian sings the first two lines in a different order, but they edited it so that he does sing it in the right order. But it's a weird take because Brian's a little bit more whiny and the double tracking on Mike's voice is kind of in and out. And it's a weird mix, but there's no other way you can get that other than Still Cruisin' or Made in USA. And you know what? Still Cruisin', the album, the damn thing went gold. So they did something right with it. At face value, it's kind of a weird album because it kind of jumps around a lot, but it seems like it's more of a hodgepodge of singles and let's grab this one song from this current project, another song from that project Brian was working on, and let's just throw them together in an album. Kind of a sloppy mess, but you know what? It frickin' worked, at least commercially.
Well, but the problem, and you can say the same thing about 15 Big Ones, is that the root of this discussion was that, like, Still Cruisin' wasn't a good thing to follow up Kokomo with, that 15 Big Ones wasn't a good thing to follow up Holland with, where it's like you can argue that they were. But what came after that was the wrong thing. Because Love You was not the right thing to follow up. I mean, you can debate the merits of Love You, and I know many people love Love You.
One of my top 5 Beach Boys albums.
And not mine. But it was not the right thing to do next. And it shows because it did not do well. And after Still Cruisin'.
That's what I was groaning about.
What came after Still Cruisin'?
Bummer in Paradise.
Well, yeah, like 3 years later.
And those of you saying, it's not really that bad an album.
Yeah,
yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is, people.
Except for the artwork, it's a terrible
album. Your
album.
Stockholm Syndrome is showing
It is a terrible album. I mean, the fact that, like, what was the label that was on?
It was on Brother. They released it internally.
They had to they had to self-publish it because Capitol was like, GTFO.
And I think one of the reasons that it wasn't ever reissued again was I think there's some unpaid bills involved with it. I don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the explanation. And that's why there are no studio tracks from Summer in Paradise on Made in California, only concert tracks.
Yeah. Either that or it's just like, let's never speak of this ever again. Well,
great cover.
But it may
great artwork.
I mean, the thing too, it's kind of like there may be some weird, like, do the Beach Boys actually own those tracks? Or is it something, I don't know. It's probably some kind of weird, murky thing. But yeah, like, let us not speak of this ever again.
Yeah, really. Wait, how did the album Still Cruisin' chart? Oh yeah, Still Cruisin' charted at 46, so slightly better than the Beach Boys' Love You, which charted at 53.
But yeah, it's they did not follow that up very well.
Well, I hope we follow this up very well because we have some topics in mind for future episodes. Oh, how's that for a segue to?
Ooh.
How's that for an exit strategy right there?
That I like.
Unless you have more to add.
No, I think if I come up with anything else, we'll do hot takes too.
Yeah, and we invite you, listeners, as well. Do you have any hot takes you'd like to share? Well, reach out to us. You will hear our booth announcers, that is ourselves, momentarily talk about that. I think we still mentioned Stitcher and Google Play in the outro, which Stitcher no longer exists, and Google Play is soon to be no longer existing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think they're just going to go YouTube now for podcasts. But yeah, so just ignore that when you hear, hey, listen to us on these two things. Listen to us for however you damn well want to listen to us.
Maybe we should re-record our booth announcements.
Yeah, we'll do that sometime. Not today. Maybe for episode 22.
Sure.
Or maybe we'll just do our booth announcements live.
Ooh.
Oh, there is one more thing I want to talk about really quickly. It's off topic. This is 271, if you will.
Okay.
And just want to promote a new podcast I've been doing lately called My Weird Record Collection. And the day that we're recording this episode, by the way, I picked up a weird record to talk about in a future episode of that podcast. It's called Let's Play Bongos. It's basically, I like to go to record stores, and after I check for my usual things like Beach Boys, Beatles, and The Who and all that, I go into that section where they don't quite know how to categorize the records. Some places call it miscellaneous. I think Amoeba calls it uncategorizable. There's another store I go to where it's just a bunch of question marks on the divider. And that's where you have some really bizarre stuff that's kind of really tells you like what was going on back in the earlier days, like things that you now have YouTube for example, like the episode I just put out the day before we're recording this was a couple of auto harp instruction records. So basically that kind of weird stuff you see in record stores, my podcast, My Weird Record Collection, talks about that. So check it out. I'll link it in the show notes. And yeah. So I guess our next episode will be number 22.
Yeah. And Does
that sound like a good plan?
And we have to get to prepping for it.
Yeah.
Because we got a lot of work to do. But it's good work. It's work we love.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so, yeah, I guess, well, I don't know about you, but I'm going to say goodbye now. So goodbye, everybody. It's Sean.
Bye.
And that was Lisa. Talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Tune X podcast. Please leave us a review at Apple Podcasts or iTunes.
You can hear us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and just about every other provider out there. If TuneX isn't on your favorite provider, please let us know.
You can email us at tunexpodcast@gmail.com. Our website, which includes the show notes, is tunex.fab4it.com. Fab4it is spelled F-A-B, then the number 4, then I-T.
Feel free to connect with us on social media. TuneX is on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram and Twitter, both under the handle of TuneX Podcast.
Our opening and closing theme, Melody 10, was written and performed by Scattered Frog. All other music and sounds used in this episode remain the properties of their respective copyright holders and are used for the purposes of commentary and review. No infringement is intended.
We'll see you next time, friends. Until then, don't back down from that wave. But what about I'm bugged my old man?
That is so not filler.
No, it is not.
That is so absolutely. That is like, talk about the state of Brian's union.
Seriously. And really, I wrote...
and it's just the best part is that he has Dennis sing it. Because he...
Excuse me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Cut that out. I was thinking in the back of my mind. Sorry. I was thinking of in the back of my mind, which is also on Summer Days and Summer Nights, right? No? What? I don't listen to albums all the way through. I listen to the stuff I like. Anyway.
All right, this will be cut. Don't worry. No one's gonna know that you said any of that.
Shut
Don't worry.